Today's edition of the Spot Check podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. Visit bettoredge.com. Grab the app in the iOS App Store. Use code SPOTTRACK. Get yourself $20 off and get cracking. We're through week one nearly of the NFL season. Plenty of baseball, plenty of upcoming basketball and hockey, plenty of ways to use that $20, including groups, competitions, head-to-head. You set the bets. You set the lines. It's the safest, fastest social betting marketplace on the internet. It's bettoredge.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, September 8th. Planning to get to, it's a big NFL show. I've got winners and losers, 6 of them. No grades, just thoughts, and some thoughts based on what we saw this offseason and how it translates at least through week one, and where some teams may be headed going forward and some players may be headed going forward. And then at the back end of this show, something I promised I'd be doing more of, and I think I'm going to try to get there every Monday. I'm going to break down the Josh Allen contract extension, a massive contract extension, and probably a perfect place to start with this little series that I'll start doing here, because if you miss Sunday Night Football, watch it today. Even if you're just a non-interested, adequate NFL fan, that's the one. That's the week one Super Bowl we all thought it would be. Plenty of intrigue, plenty of drama, and a heck of a finish for sure, that unfortunately a bunch of Bills fans missed, but tough to blame them at that time with that circumstance and that probability. So the Josh Allen contract breakdown at the back end of this show with visuals. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for that. Please hit subscribe. The first winner, right on cue, quarterbacks. If you've complained out loud, or you've been around somebody that's been complaining out loud that quarterbacks make way too much money, not just in the grand scheme of things, but in comparison to the rest of this league, week one was not a good look for you, because it's just an instant reminder that if you have a quarterback worth a damn, you are markedly better, not just on paper, but in terms of what you can do over 4 quarters in any given week when the actual gameplay matters. Okay. It's really tough to judge this stuff over the summer, certainly through the preseason. Most of these notable quarterbacks just sit on the bench now or on an exercise bike for all the preseason. So we knew that our minds were all going to have to shift for this week one. And that's exactly what happens. It's going from modified to varsity in a 1 week span. And the quarterbacks that we wanted to compete at a high level did compete at a high level. You know, were there some clunkers out there? Sure. But for the most part, these guys were ready to roll. And, you know, nothing says that more than the Sunday night game I just alluded to, which was MVP versus MVP in every regard. And look, I'm not just talking about athleticism and being dynamic, right? Jaden, Josh, Lamar. That's obviously a huge part of it. That's about 33% of this league now. Okay, if you include some of these younger guys, and where the league has certainly been going for the better part of a decade. But Aaron Rodgers, Joe Flacco, okay, 40-year-old competency, just understanding, being able to outsmart, understanding how defenses work, especially when you know that some of these week one slates are going to have a little bit more vanilla basics to them, right? None of these game plans, I think, out of the gate came with too much flair. And when you're a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, who can go out there and read some of these things left and right, up and down, there's definitely ways to be successful. In fact, if you're a betting person, it's probably something to think about going forward. All right. Experienced quarterbacks are going to dominate, at least out of the gate, first half, some of these younger defenses and some of these younger coaching staffs, to put that on notice as well. But just a really strong gamut of successful quarterback play. Not super sloppy, not a ton of sacks, not a ton of picks across the league this weekend. Just entertainment. And that's what you're looking for out of the gate. Is it going to last for 18 weeks? Hell no. All right, these defenses are going to catch up. Plenty of the things that we know we're expecting on paper, and the projections and the betting are going to come to fruition. But at least for 1 week, you can just see out loud why we have a $60 million quarterback, why we have 6 $55 million quarterbacks, et cetera, which leads me to what's next, because that's kind of how we're going to do this, right? I'm going to give you a little bit of an overreaction to week one, and then we're going to talk about some of the data and where things may be headed. Which top 8 quarterback had the worst week one? boy, like I said, it's tough. That's a tough sell right now because it was a pretty clean slate. You can say that, the Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals didn't exactly explode in Cleveland, but you have to look at that Cleveland defense and say there's at least substance there. And they're going to have weeks like this when, if Joe Flacco is competent, as we know he can be, they can at least keep themselves within games, right? Dak was decent. And certainly, Dak was good. And he's a couple of drop passes away from winning that game and really changing this week 1 narrative. A Dallas Cowboys win on Thursday night against Philly, would have been somewhat jaded because of the Jalen Carter situation. But man, that's all we're talking about right now, versus the Chiefs losing and some other things that went down yesterday. But there's a couple drops where Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys are back in the forefront for good reason, not just for manufactured reasons. Certainly, Trevor Lawrence had a great week 1. Jordan Love, we'll get to him in a second, a great week 1. So that brings us to Tua, and you can kind of put Tua and Jared Goff in kind of a very similar situation. They're very tightly connected in terms of their average pay and their potential outs here. And let's get to that because my first loss is the Miami Dolphins. So actually, I'm going to hold and flash forward. I want to mention a couple more quarterbacks quickly, and then we'll get to the Dolphins and a little bit grander set here. Did CJ Stroud take a step forward? The sophomore regression was there last year. Houston had the injury bug. They've kind of got it again this year. It was obviously a slow start for Houston. Their defense did hold up fairly well, as we expected them to be. If you are a fantasy person, the Houston Texans defense probably went flying off the board rather quickly within your draft. But, this is an organization that expects to be winning, especially in the division, and a good Rams team with a good Rams defense. Very similar, I think, in terms of how these two teams are going to be structured throughout the year. But you've got a near 40-year-old Matthew Stafford and a year 3 CJ Stroud, and it was 14-9 Rams. So not much to talk about there in terms of on the scoreboard, but I don't think CJ Stroud has anybody feeling right now, okay, he's out of that sophomore funk. He's heading towards a situation where we're going to be talking about him as the next $65 million quarterback in football because he'll become extension eligible after 2025. He didn't do much for me in terms of putting himself in that position, in that driver's seat, but that's a tough week 1 matchup. They are injury riddled right now. So as they begin to get healthier, as some of the rust starts to kick off a little bit here, and we'll see if that offensive line can hold up, because that was the problem last year. They gutted the damn thing all offseason and are trying to rebuild this thing on the fly via every channel possible. But we'll see. That's definitely something we're watching closely, because outside of him and this next guy, we don't have too many quarterback extension candidates heading towards 2026. This guy, however, did everything he needed to do last year and did it once again in week 1. That would be Baker Mayfield, who got a bit of a pot sweetener on his contract from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to kind of hold tight here, as we kind of expected. I was talking extension quite a while for Baker in Tampa Bay because he certainly outkicked his coverage in 2024. They added some things, brought some money forward from 2026, fully guaranteed 2025 early on. And look, he's going to make $30 million. He's got incentives built into this thing that he can basically, add about 30% more to that. We'll see where he gets to, but the clutch comeback win in week 1 is exactly what the doctor ordered, because that is also a very banged up roster across the board and an older roster across the board. But they had some young guys really step up, and Baker, this is just who he is now, right? I mean, the sample size is well enough to us to have to think about him as a resuscitated or still trying to find his sea legs quarterback. He is an explosive, clutch, dynamic quarterback. He just is. And I know it's tough to kind of rebirth yourself in this league, especially now, especially with the rookie wage scale, but he has done it. And he did everything he had to do last year, did it again yesterday. He is the guy in the driver's seat right now for the big explosive contract extension this offseason. And we'll see where the next 17 weeks take us. But he, I think, is the big quarterback takeaway in terms of the future money for week 1. The aforementioned Miami Dolphins. Yikes. Look, what's funny is, in talking with Brandon and some things like that, the Dolphins had some money coming kind of late, not only for this week 1 matchup against the Colts, which they were underdogs in, but also for some futures, some AFC stuff, some playoff stuff. You just started to hear their name a little bit more than felt comfortable, because if you're just reading the breadcrumbs, as we tend to do here quite a bit, having to manually update these transactions and kind of understand the roster construction as much as possible, they were telling us out loud, hey, we are not okay. All right. We are not a stable situation here. And that obviously starts with Tua, who, became the center point of plenty of memes yesterday, plenty of tweets, plenty of social media presence, and not in the way I think he or any of those Dolphins players were expecting it to happen. They weren't supposed to win yesterday, according to all the odds, and they got destroyed. They got absolutely destroyed, and Tua looked, I think Rusty would be generous, but this is a situation where he needed to come out swinging to kind of quiet some of the, everything. Everything was looking against this Miami team. Most people that I know closely are betting them to be last place in the AFC East. That's exactly what they looked like yesterday, and Tua looked like that type of player as well. Here's the problem with what they've done. They became so pot committed to a starting lineup. They punted on a bunch of draft picks in order to put this thing together quickly, because they thought they had the coach that could game plan themselves into just absolute offensive juggernaut, and they'd figured out the rest. And they added Bradley Chubb. They brought in some younger players. They had some lightning in the bottle moments, and then Tua's injury history obviously caught up to them. So there's just too much ebb and flow, up and down, hills and valleys, to imagine this team being consistently good and or having the depth to plug and play themselves into some late season wins. So I've been alluding to this since March, when this team did almost nothing in free agency. Yes, they added guard James Daniels on a 3 for $24. They extended Zach Sealer. Nothing wrong with doing anything on either side of the line at any point in time. That's always a safe bet. But outside of that, the Jalen Ramsey, Jonnu Smith trade for Minkah and picks, that to me was a subtraction, not an addition. And you could say Minkah can plug and play. Look, there's a reason that a Pittsburgh Steelers defense gave up on Minkah Fitzpatrick. There just is, okay? Because they gave up the world to acquire him initially throughout his rookie contract. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey was a factor for Pittsburgh if you watch the end of that game, and Minkah was barely mentioned. So it's week 1. It's an overreaction. I can tell you right now, though, that this has been a 6 to 7 month long journey for me, trying to follow what Miami has been telling us based on their transactions. And this is exactly what I expected. I expected them to look like a last place team. I didn't expect Tua to look this rusty, this bad, this out of sync, because there are weapons. There's 3 running backs. There's 2 wide receivers. Now, they got kind of pigeonholed with the tight end position a little bit here, and they can fix that. That's a notable position they can fix. But if Tua doesn't figure things out within the next 3 to 4 weeks, and I'm going to give them a full month, they're going to be a big-time trade deadline team. And they're going to look to subtract as much as possible, pick up draft picks. I would assume Mike McDaniel and the coaching staff won't be around for much of this. I assume if you look at some of those odds, he's the top of that list. But that's what I expected this to look like, is a team that was built for very short-term success, and that window of success has passed, despite the fact that they've got a $53 million quarterback and one of the highest wide receiver rooms in all of football. I expect to see some of that start to be torn down quickly. And like I said, we'll give them a full month, but writing was on the wall, and they continue to write that message pretty clearly out loud to us yesterday in that destroyed loss from the Indianapolis Colts. A victory. How about the Green Bay Packers? How about the we're already going to be good and then got Micah Parsons Green Bay Packers? Look, Jordan Love was not healthy last year. We tend to forget that a little bit. We know the weapons weren't healthy, and Christian Watson and many of those players still aren't going into 2025. But instead of resting on their laurels and understanding that maybe they weren't going to be able to build themselves, especially with how they structure contracts and how little they do with free agency, generally speaking, that they weren't going to be able to put themselves in the driver's seat in the NFC or even in their division, and they completely zagged on us. They said, look, Jordan Love wasn't healthy. Christian Watson wasn't reliable last year. So let's draft a first-round wide receiver. Let's bring Jordan Love back to full health. And let's add Aaron Banks on a massive free agent contract. Let's extend our right tackle, something they generally wouldn't be doing in August or July. And then let's do the haymaker, right? And then let's pillage the Dallas Cowboys for Micah Parsons and sign him to one of the biggest contracts in the history of our franchise. All those things, very unlike the Green Bay Packers of past or even of present. And that's why so many people around this organization are buzzing. Well, it looked exactly like it was supposed to look yesterday against, we know, a good Detroit Lions team who was going to take a step back because of the coaching situation, but is still uber talented, is still extending players. Wide receiver Jameson Williams got a 3 for 83 yesterday before the start of their week one. They're not going anywhere. It's just going to take a minute for them to kind of catch themselves. And the Packers caught them off guard a little bit, and the Packers are damn good. All of those things can be true at the same time, and that's exactly what we saw yesterday. That's a very, very solid Jordan Love who understands his system. It's a very well-coached team, and it's now a defense that has bookends of Rashawn Gary and Micah Parsons, and Parsons could just be that kind of ghost player out there for most of the time, whereas his aura, his presence is going to be enough to be disrupting and to draw attention, which means these other very stout interior and edge rusher players and linebackers, by the way, are going to have room to operate. All right. They have loaded up transactionally, certainly financially. They have let some things mature in terms of health and rehab and experience around this roster. And they believe they have the keys to the window, both in this division and I think the NFC as well. And I know many of you have already put some money at them in this regard. So cheers to you. What's next? You saw Romeo Doubs out there kind of doing his thing a little bit. You know, he's a number 2, number 3 option on this team. And I think on most teams, he's on an expiring contract. They do have kind of a bounty of young wide receivers. I'd be shocked if they gave Doubs an extension anytime before free agency, but we'll see what happens before the course of next March. And then their current left tackle, Rasheed Walker, is on an expiring contract. But they did draft a second rounder. Anthony Belton, I believe is his name. They did draft a second round who could come in and step in, not only, you know, going forward, but maybe this season as well, if injuries and things like that step in. So the right side of the line is locked in. They've got Elgin Jenkins, the center, locked in for 2 more seasons. They're going to have to continue to pay to keep this thing together, probably in an Eagles style manner. But for the most part, this is a financially strong core, and they're well within their window of contention. So if you bet on the Green Bay Packers, you're a big winner right now for week 1. Interesting one here. Loss. I have no data yet, and I'm going to work to get some of that as we get more of a sample size. But one of the things I was watching as I was letting the red zone bring me up around the league yesterday was that the tweaks that have been made to this kickoff are absolutely going to change some things, right? Because the kickoffs, the return rate is way up. I think they want it to be in the 60s, maybe closer to 70%, because the touchback was so prevalent in 2024 with that immediate change they made. Not only do we see kickoffs being returned, every single time I was turning around, there was field position starting in the 45, the 50, midfield, past midfield. That stood out like a sore thumb yesterday, and it's a good and a bad, right? So it's a good if your team can do that consistently, but what's going to suffer from that? Offensive yardage. So if you have a player or two on a team that has a hell of a kick returner, just know that the starting position, the field position game, may be taking away the opportunity for that player specifically to earn as much production as they had in 2024. Because if you're used to your team starting at the 25 or the 30 or the 35, and now it's the 45, maybe even midfield rather consistently, that's minus 15, minus 20 yards right there. Do I think it'll be that drastic? No. Am I overreacting to a couple of highlights I saw in week 1? Yes. But Roger Goodell has come out and said that he wants 65% of these kickoffs being returned. And if teams have built for that, and I think many of them have, this is going to become a serious weapon. This is going to become a serious field position weapon that teams will use to their advantage. You will see less quarterback yardage. You will see less running back yardage. And your fantasy and real teams will suffer in this regard, though scoring may be up. So, maybe the battle of drives are less, but scoring is more, so you get more drives, balances the whole thing out. That's the data set I'm really interested to see in a couple of weeks here and see where things are. But if it turns into more scoring, who the hell is going to be mad about that? Nobody. Not the bettors, not the fantasy people, and certainly not the people paying the bills and cashing the checks for the NFL. Win. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm giving the Jets a win, even though they lost. And even though they lost to their former quarterback, who then went in front of a microphone and said he was very, very happy to beat everybody involved with the Jets organization. And I have a love-hate relationship with Aaron Rodgers, but that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful Aaron Rodgers quote right there. Anyway, if you're a Jets fan, if you follow this team, and it's been tough, I'm sure, you have to be feeling at least adequate this morning. Like, hey, we did some things. We made a ton of changes. We let Aaron Rodgers walk. We signed Justin Fields kind of when nobody else wanted him. And we looked pretty darn okay against what should be one of the better defenses in football, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, it was a mess of a week one battle. It was super entertaining to watch, but Fields looked really good. And he was making the right passing plays. And he was executing, and he was accurate. And certainly he was using his legs. And so was Breece Hall, a player who was an absolute ghost in 2024 and came out both catching and running at a high rate yesterday. It seems like offensively that they've put some things together over the offseason. Can that last? Can that be resilient? Can they make the adjustments they need to make to continue to score 30-plus points every week? That's going to be what has to happen, because defensively, it doesn't appear to be there. Now, they've made strong moves there as well. They extended Sauce Gardner. They extended Jamie and Sherwood, one of the better interior linebackers in all of football. They've got some weapons, but they were also adding D linemen September 1st via trades, right? So that they know they're a little bit deficient there. And is that something they can fix on the fly? Here's my take at this, because basically every notable move, Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, Justin Fields, even Brandon Stevens in the secondary, those are their notable adds or extensions this offseason. Those all do appear to be solid through week one. If they can kind of hold the fort, if they're a in the hunt team, and I think people believe they can be, through week 6, they're going to be adding. They're going to be a trade deadline buyer, not just because they think they can maybe sneak in 2025, but because this is clearly a 2-year window. You'll always want to give a coaching staff that second year to properly add to the roster, to properly put things together how they want to do it. But if Justin Fields is the guy, that's all this team needs to become aggressive, more aggressive. So trade deadline this year, obviously next offseason, look out for massive, massive movement from the New York Jets. So it's a big 4 to 5 weeks for them just to sort of settle into what they want to be, understand that Justin Fields might be the guy. And oh, by the way, because of the Baker Mayfield talk and some of these things we've been mentioning with this resuscitation of the quarterback position, he's on a flat 20-20, 2 for 40. He's earning 20 this year. He's earning 20 next year. But if he's the guy, and if he looks anything like he looked yesterday through the course of the next 16 weeks, 16 games at least, he's not going to be playing on $20 million next year. All right. So we're going to be talking about a Justin Fields extension come next February and March as well. But certainly a good week one, despite the loss. And we'll see where the next 5 to 6 weeks of New York Jets football takes us. Win or loss, I'm going across town to the Giants. We know the schedule's tough. We know there's a lot that's going to be hinging on the next couple of weeks here. We feel like it's not the coaching staff. At least that's what's been told out loud to us. But, man, you've got a disgruntled Malik Neighbors. You've got people calling for Jackson Dart at halftime because Russell Wilson certainly didn't hold up his end of the bargain, despite the fact that he was brought in to be the QB1. You had a defense that looks great on paper, but was kind of diced up by Jaden Daniels, which is going to happen, but also Deebo Samuel, a player that many believe San Francisco was giving up on because he was past his prime, and then turned back into the Deebo Samuel of old in 1 week. It's a tough loss. This was one of those things. This was one of those games where you just wanted the Giants to get off to a good start so that things could settle down a little bit, because this was the darling team. This is the team that everybody wanted to bet, but the schedule was brutal. I think it was top 4 hardest schedules in all of football, at least on paper. You know, they added some pieces to the secondary. They brought back Darius Slayton. Obviously, they added Abdul Carter on the defensive line through the draft. You liked the draft they had with Carter and Jackson Dart out of the gate. There's just a lot of hope. Now, will they let this thing get to 2026 to try to see where they can be at that point in time? Here's the problem. And we can say that the coaching staff is going to be able to do their thing and sort of take this next iteration forward. 8 of the 22 starters that stepped on the field yesterday have expiring contracts, including Russell Wilson, Kayvon Thibodeau, bunch of the offensive line. So it could be one of two things. It could be we're going to continue to improve and be aggressive in the free agency and the draft and trades to replace these players, some of whom already have replacements on the roster in Jackson Dart, etc. Or we're in a really nice position to rip this Band-Aid off right now, fire everybody, let those 8 players walk, and kind of reset ourselves financially, knowing we have a halfway decent defense already on paper. And if we can get younger and better on the offensive side of the ball quickly, maybe we become a playoff team by 2027. So again, huge week 1 overreaction, but we know how difficult this is going to be going forward, especially if Russell Wilson looks like this version of Russell Wilson for much longer. All right, let's get to this Josh Allen contract and get back to the coffee. Okay, the Bills got off to a raucous start with their free agency and their offseason when they signed Josh Allen to a massive renegotiation. They ended up extending 6 notable players. It was a huge offseason for them. We all know where this is headed. But the Allen contract, one of the bigger contracts in the history of the sport, absolutely the biggest contract in terms of that guaranteed number, and all of these cash flow numbers leading up to $220 million over the next 4 seasons. Here's why we call it a renegotiation. So if we scroll down to and those watching on YouTube, I'm showing this live and in person. If we scroll down to the previous contract, his first rookie extension, he had 4 years remaining and he had 171 remaining. Buffalo simply ripped up those 4 years, something that rarely gets done in the NFL, but they started from scratch, obviously brought over any dead cap that existed, but we're now on a full 6-year contract. The cash flow is all adjusted, all front loaded to match the level of player that we all saw at Sunday Night Football, MVP candidate year in and year out here. And the numbers are eye-popping, as they should be. Now, that number right there is the one that many people take away from this, because it doesn't come close to Dak Prescott's $60 million. It didn't shatter the league, as we know, statistically speaking, he should have. And by the way, Lamar Jackson's current valuation in Spot Track is $68 million per year. So to tell you where things are going with these dynamic quarterbacks, it's everywhere. The $55 million per year is simply because they stretched this thing over 6 years. So whenever you do that, and there's cash that was brought over and ripped up and started from scratch, you're going to get yourself a lower APY. You know, the more you stretch, the lower this is going to be. That's why hockey has 8-year contracts, because their cap hit is based on the APY. Okay. And very similarly in baseball, that's why you had your Pujols and those players on 12. Bryce Harper's on a 13-year contract right now, because the tax salary is the APY of the contract. Well, it doesn't work that way in football. In football, it's year to year. It's however you want to structure your salary cap. And you can do that with multiple bonuses that as we'll talk about here, to help make things more team friendly as you go. And depending on how big your contract is and how much new money you added, that's how you get the APY in football. So it's why we reference it. It's certainly a metric that's put out there quite a bit, but we try not to hang too much on what that APY is, especially with these larger contracts that get much more complicated. Obviously, these numbers become much more prevalent. And as we talked about, the cumulative cash flow and how things are structured from a cash perspective becomes much, much more relevant and, of course, important to the players and agents that are dealing with these contracts firsthand. So how come when I see most of these contract extensions, these couple years to start look like rookie contracts? We've got $9 million and $19 million and et cetera. Why doesn't Josh Allen have a contract that looks like that? Two things. Number one, he got a $57 million signing bonus. Okay. So even over 5 years, you can do the math on that. That's going to be over $11 million of proration, as you can see right there in year 5. So why do these numbers exist? They exist because he had a previous contract that had signing bonuses attached to it, right? Now we've ripped those out here for dead cap purposes, but you can see all of these bonuses had to get carried over to the new contract. All of these bonuses had to get carried over. All of these bonuses had to get carried over. Anything that says proration and has been paid out in cash already is considered dead cap. And when you sign an extension, those have to get transferred. Now they get transferred into the same years. So just as a for instance, this 4.3 million here is now added to that 11 million we just talked about on the new signing bonus, which gets us the 15.6 million of proration right there for 2025. So when you factor in that, plus that as carried over, essentially, that's why Josh Allen's cap hit in 2025, despite the brand new contract, is still over $36 million. Same thing can be said for Dak Prescott. If you go look at him, it's why he's carrying a 50 million plus cap hit in 2025, despite a brand new contract. Okay. As we go down, that proration continues. It gets lesser and lesser, as you can imagine it would. But Buffalo didn't screw around too much with this one, and they haven't with many of their new contracts lately. The $147 million guaranteed at signing includes that bonus, that small minimum salary that we talked about here. All of 2026, so if I flip over to our cash, all of this is fully guaranteed, and 34.5 of this, 53 million, is fully guaranteed. That's out of the gate. That's at signing. Typical 2.5-year guarantee at signing, but it comes with 147 million, which is nothing typical. You'll see these numbers here. Okay. It's a 4 bonus proration contract. Massive signing bonus, really strong option bonuses in years 2, 3, and 4, which leads us to a ton of option bonus proration running into 2032 with some void years and more to go after that. Okay. So Buffalo has done basically everything possible to keep these cap hits at bay. And the thing to bring up here is Josh Allen's not on minimum salaries going forward. Yes, this year, but not in the years to follow, which means we're looking at 56 million today, but that doesn't necessarily have to stick. If the Bills want to convert 15 million of that, and maybe even that workout bonus into signing bonus next March, they can drop this down and free up about 11 million more for the 2026 season, drop this into the mid 40s. They can do the same thing with these numbers in 2027 and so forth and so forth. So there's still wiggle room. All right. And if they don't have to do it, I don't think GM Brandon Beane will do that. Okay. Because as we go forward, nearly a $300 million salary cap, maybe 320, maybe 340. Some of these bigger cap hits are going to be tolerated, and they're going to be tolerated not because they can be, but because you simply don't want to push that much proration forward. Why? Because of exactly what I just showed you. It has nothing to do with the fact that we're trying to get out of this contract and they're worried that Josh Allen won't be able to live up to his contract at 32 years old. Maybe that becomes the case. But we're thinking about it more as a positive thing, which is when we get to 2029, maybe even the February preceding 2029 season, Josh Allen's going to need a new contract because the going rate at that point in time might be 80 million, 85 million a year. Who knows? All right. And that said contract's going to have dead cap and dead cap and dead cap and dead cap and dead cap to roll over. All right. Now you can take this and make a nice big signing bonus with that new contract, but you want to limit just how much has to roll over if humanly possible so that you don't get into a situation where you're essentially doubling your cap hits on a brand new contract because of what existed on the previous one. So don't be surprised if Buffalo does everything humanly possible to not have to cap convert these salaries, at least in their entirety, for this reason alone. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes it's not feasible. It's an expensive roster. It's a roster that's trying to win Super Bowls right now. So you can understand if GMs and front offices do everything humanly possible from a cap perspective to make sure that happens. But it will complicate things in 2029 going forward when the next blockbuster Josh Allen contract gets here. So let's talk about this 250 and then we'll get out of here. 147 million of it fully guaranteed now. By the 5th league day of next year, so March, 18th-ish, we don't quite know yet, another 18 locks in. That's the rest of 2027. So by mid-March, all of 25 through 27 will be fully guaranteed or owed or paid to him. And then we've got those early vesting triggers, obviously all of 2028, 14 million of 2029, and then the rest in 2029 becomes fully guaranteed in March of 2029. So he's got early triggers through 2029, which gives the potential outline here. But as I mentioned, with 2 years left and only half of 2029 locked in early, you could see this as a pretty consistently clear, let's start to talk about this thing again moment for both the front office of the Bills and for Josh Allen, especially because you've got an 86 million and change cap hit, which is probably going to be bigger if you start to see some of these salaries get cap converted and pushed down the line. So yes, they could secure him through 2029 on early guarantees, but I would put 1 year earlier here as the likely starting point for an extension for Josh Allen, which brings us to 220 million over the next 4 years, locked in, rock solid, and then we'll start talking about that next big MVP type caliber blockbuster extension, which, by the way, is probably going to be amplified because of what Lamar Jackson will be signing over the course of the next 6 to 7 months with the Baltimore Ravens. He's worth every dollar of it. He's on a great contract now, but he needs to be on an elite contract. They need to preserve some of that cap as we just laid out here. And I believe he's got a $74 million cap hit for 2026. So that next Lamar Jackson extension will be an early look at what Josh Allen can be thinking about cap adjusted for 2029 after he gets through his $222 million 4-year run with the Bills. So it's a massive upgrade for Josh Allen. He can add to that based on Super Bowls. Okay. He's got to win the Super Bowl. He's got to play in 60% of the regular season snaps, and he's got to play in 60% of that Super Bowl, and he could add another 500,000 to it. But for the most part, this thing is locked and loaded through 2028, half of 2029. And then 33-year-old Josh Allen can start talking about his next massive blockbuster, probably with the Bills, because where else would you rather be? That's the Josh Allen breakdown. We'll be doing more of these pretty much every week as we go through some of the bigger contracts in the NFL and some of these other sports as well. Please subscribe. Please rate. Please visit bettoredge.com. Use code SPOTTRACK. Get yourself $20 on the house to start. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spot Track Podcast.